Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry, we're running a little bit late. We were having technical difficulties with our setup, but we're here to talk to you about your rights as a presenter. My name is Matt, as a protester. My name is Matt Dos Santos, and I am the legal director of the ACLU of Oregon.
And I'm Kelly Simon, the staff attorney at the ACLU of Oregon. So today we're going to be talking about your rights while protesting. We know some of you may be taking to the streets tonight, and we just want to arm you with some general information so that you know what rights you have while you're out there. We will be taking questions at the end, but remember, as attorneys, we cannot give you legal advice, so to the extent that you have questions about specific facts that happened to you, we may not be able to answer those questions. But if you do feel like you've had a situation where your rights as a protester have been violated, you can always reach out to us directly for individual conversations via our legal request line form online at aclu-or.org/help, or by calling our legal request line at 503-227-3186.
Yeah, and just a quick note, that phone line is not answered in real time, so that's not the phone number that you write on your arm in the event that you're arrested. If you're out there, legal observers will give you a phone number to write on your arm in the event that you're arrested. Look for folks with a green hat. They are NLG folks, and also there may be folks from the ACLU there with wearing blue vests that say legal observers.
And if you do reach out to us via our request line, we have staff and volunteers that will respond to every call, every letter, every form you submit on the website, or every video through our Mobile Justice app. And for those of you who don't know about the Mobile Justice app, Mobile Justice Oregon is a free app available both iPhone and Android. And it allows you to take video that's automatically uploaded in the room next door, actually. And on there is some Know Your Rights information, some of which... Yeah, there you go. Nice, Matt. Some of which, you may hear today. There may be some extra information. And you can also submit incident reports on there if you don't have video to submit. So far, we've had over 16,000 downloads in Oregon. So good job, Oregon. Keep on using it.
So here we go. So what do you need to know before heading out to exercise your constitutionally protected right to protest? Just wanting to give you a quick overview about what to expect. So in recent years, there has been a rise in the number of popular protests in which people have taken to the streets to express grievances and claim their rights all over the world. We've seen them here in Oregon in response to the recent election. We saw them in Ferguson. We've seen them a lot in the United States. And at the ACLU, we think they're fundamentally important to our democracy. In fact, we often say that it is critical to a functional democracy to have the right to protest. But it is also unfortunately true that governments and police can violate this right through the use of mass arrests, illegal use of force, criminalization of protest, and other means intended to thwart the free public expression. Standing up for your right to protest is sometimes really challenging, and especially when demonstrators are met with violence on the streets. But knowing your rights is the most powerful weapon you have against police abuse.
So before we get going and diving in here, I think it's helpful just to make sure we're all speaking the same language when we use terms protest. We are using to say any solemn declaration of opinion, usually of dissent. And it's a pretty broad definition, and that's a good thing in our minds because
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it can take a bunch of different forms, right? Like, so saying a declaration of opinion can be like taking to the streets and carrying signs and chanting, but it can also be things like burning a flag, or engaging in a hunger strike, or maybe even saying nothing at all, engaging in moments of silence.
Right. I think Colin Kaepernick, when he sits down quietly alone, those things can be protests. It doesn't have to be a large group of people. I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And then when we say dissent, that means you differ in your opinion or feeling, or you disagree with something. So just to make sure we're all on the same page. And just in case not everyone is sitting there with their pocket constitution ready.
Which you can go get at ACLU.org for free still, I think.
I think so. Hurry up, supplies are limited. We just want everyone to be aware of what the First Amendment says. So the First Amendment says this: Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Yeah, people throw around the First Amendment a lot. We certainly at the ACLU talk about it a lot, so it's just important to know that that is literally what it says. But I do want to take a step back for a moment. For those of you who are here but aren't U.S. citizens, under the USA Patriot Act, which, as you probably recall, was a law passed in response to the events happening around 9/11, non-U.S. citizens who are not permanent residents can be investigated solely because of their First Amendment activities. So, what does that mean? It means immigrants who are engaged in protests, marches, or demonstrations should carry with them the telephone number of friends and relatives, as well as telephone numbers of an immigration attorney or an immigrant advocacy organization. We don't say this to dissuade you from protesting if you're an immigrant. We just want you to know the facts as you're going out there. And just also important to know, in Oregon, state and local law enforcement are prohibited from acting as federal immigration officers. But in the past, there have been reports of police and, violating this law.
And again, the number we read at the beginning is not the number to write on your arm.
But it is the number to call after the fact if you have issues around, these kinds of things.
That's right. So where can we engage in these free speech activities? Where can we protest? Generally, all types of expression are constitutionally protected in what the law calls traditional public forums.
Right.
Think, when you hear public forums, think streets, sidewalks, and parks. Those are the very clear areas. In addition, though, sometimes the government may give you the right to speak in other public locations, things like government buildings, plazas, schools at times. You may approach pedestrians on the sidewalk when you're in these public forums with things like leaflets, newspapers, petitions, donation solicitations, all without a permit. These types of free speech activities are legal as long as you're not blocking the entrances or harassing the people passing by you. However, a permit may be required if you want to set up things to distribute those leaflets, like tables or other physical structures that may accompany you. A permit is not required for picketing on the public sidewalk.
Yeah, that's really important to know. And this is an area where we get a lot of questions. Do I need a permit before I engage in a free speech activity? So, not usually. However, certain types of events may require permits. In certain instances, if you are going to exit the sidewalks and march in the streets, you may be required to have a permit, especially if it creates long-term street closures. A long rally requiring the use of certain sound amplification devices. So what I mean by that is like massive sound systems. I'm not talking about a megaphone. And those are, very specific on city ordinances. And a rally at certain designated parks and plazas. So, for example, Portland Parks may require you to have a permit for certain parks and plazas. But let me talk a little bit more detailed about that. So many permit procedures require that the application be filed several weeks in advance. However, and this is really important, the First Amendment prohibits such an advanced requirement from being used to prevent protests in response to recent news events. So in Portland and around the country, you saw people taking to the streets in response to the shooting of Michael Brown. A city could not require a permit for that. Also, permit ordinances that give too much discretion to the police or city officials to impose conditions on the event, such as a route of a march or the sound levels of amplification equipment, those can also be unconstitutional. They could violate the First Amendment if they're unnecessary for traffic control or public safety. Or even if they interfere significantly with communication to the intended audience of the protest. So there's a lot of leeway. And this is also very important. A permit cannot be declined just because you have a controversial or unpopular view. So those are things to keep in mind.
Yeah, so permits are a type of limitation that the government can place on our speech. And these things are allowed when they're narrowly drawn. And what the law refers to these as is time, place, and manner restrictions. So these things are legal. For example, the permit requirements for large groups, or when, like Matt said, you have major sound amplification devices. Again, not your bullhorn type things. Any restrictions must apply. So any restrictions the government places on you must apply to all speech, regardless of the point of view.
And so what Kelly means by that, just to be really clear, is like the city could not provide you a permit if you were anti-Trump, but then deny you a permit if you were pro-Trump, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about point of view.
That's right. The First Amendment does not protect speech when it's combined with the violation of established laws, such as trespass on private property. And I think we'll get into the concept of civil disobedience in just a minute, but we just want to flag that for you, that when there's clearly a violation of law, there may be other issues to consider while you're out there. A speaker can be arrested, for example, for inciting violence. But what we mean when we say inciting violence, we mean right there and then. It has to be an imminent violence, not just somebody attended a rally and you were speaking, and 2 weeks later they finally felt so motivated by what they heard and the sentiment of the group that they decided to go commit an act of violence. That's not inciting violence.
Right. And to be clear, the ACLU does not endorse violence or anything like that. We hope that folks go out and protest in a way that's productive and peaceful. But we do want to just make sure that you clearly understand the law. And while I'm talking about understanding the law, I think it's really important to talk about civil disobedience. So just to define that. So civil disobedience is the refusal to comply with certain laws as a form of protest. Often these are valid laws. Such as a prohibition on obstructing the access to a building entrance. The First Amendment, in some cases, does not protect those kinds of acts. If you're knowingly and intentionally breaking a law, you may be subject to arrest. That's important to know, because if you are engaging in civil disobedience, you may be lawfully arrested, even if you are also engaging in First Amendment protected speech.
Yeah, I think like I kind of mentioned with the trespass law, a general rule to keep in mind is the free speech activity can't take place on private property. So I think that's a good general rule. You don't have the right to remain on private property, especially after you've been told to leave by the owner too. So maybe you were on private property, engaged in an activity where you did have the right to do it, but once an owner tells you to leave, don't continue doing it.
Yeah.
Probably a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, and sometimes we get questions about this, especially around shopping malls, because it's a place that a lot of people go to, and it feels very public. But shopping malls are almost always, and probably could say always, owned by private companies. It's private property. It's not like the streets or the sidewalks or a park. So if the mall security asks you to leave and they tell you that you don't have the right to be there, chances are they're right.
Yeah, and this is inside shopping malls.
Right. So a few things also that we want to touch on, that sort of like goes over the overview, but we want to talk about a few more things like mass arrests. So when a crowd of protesters is in a place that police believe the crowd cannot lawfully be, the police must carefully distinguish between those protesters who intend to be arrested for civil disobedience, like folks who are actually there just to be arrested, to bring attention to the laws that they disagree with, or the issue that they disagree with, and those protesters who do not know their presence is unlawful. So we believe, the ACLU believes, the best police practice is individualized commands to leave on a threat of arrest, followed by a realistic opportunity to leave. So a police officer says, Kelly, you need to leave this, you need to leave the street, you're blocking traffic, you know this, and you need to go onto the sidewalk down there. Now I'm going to allow you an opportunity to comply, which is actually very individualized based on Kelly's circumstances. Can she walk quickly? Does she have some kind of physical disability? All of those things matter in assessing an individualized, realistic response.
Yeah, and if you do find yourselves caught in one of these individualized interactions with the police, one thing we want to also flag is Oregon law prohibits resisting arrest, and in Oregon that means active resistance.
And sorry to interrupt, Kelly, but just important to know, if you are in another state, resisting arrest can mean something very different. For example, in Illinois, resisting arrest can include something like just going limp. So it can include passive resistance. So if you're watching this or tuning in from a different state, be sure to know what your laws of your local state include.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Thanks, Matt. On the other hand, if you're arguing with the police officer about the validity of your arrest or trying to ask questions about why you're being arrested, these types of things without some other physical act that impedes the officer arresting you does not amount to resisting arrest. So just because you're arguing, you shouldn't be slapped with additional charges, but if you are actively resisting, you might see additional charges.
Right. So probably the most important question, right, is what do I do if I get stopped by the police? First, and I can't stress this enough, stay calm, be polite, and don't run. Those are three things that can keep you and the folks around you out of harm's way. Make sure you keep your hands where the police can see them. You'll often see people, especially, saying hands up, don't shoot. Keep your hands where police can see them. Don't argue, even if it's protected by the First Amendment. Kelly just said it was protected by the First Amendment, but we're just talking about things that could keep you safe. Don't argue, resist, or obstruct the police, even if you're innocent or you believe that the police are violating your rights. Again, in Oregon, this is specific to Oregon, you do not have to identify yourself when you are merely detained, but it could make the encounter go more smoothly if you do. So, unless you're taken into custody, you don't have to provide your ID or anything like that. Again, I just wanted to point that out. If you are, let me say one more thing. So point out that you're not disrupting anybody else's, rights or their First Amendment activities, and that the First Amendment protects your actions. And this is critical. If you're stopped by a police officer, ask them if you're free to leave. Officer, am I free to leave? Officer, am I under arrest? If they say you are free to leave, or if the officer says no, you're not under arrest, then calmly and silently walk away.
What if they want to look in my bag before I walk away?
That's such an important point. So you do not have to consent to searches. So I would just also say, officer, I do not consent to searches. That is just so critical to protecting your rights. But if they go and search your bag anyway, you have to let them. So the police can search you even if it's illegally done. What that means, though, is that then you would contact the ACLU or another attorney, and you could sue the police for violating your constitutionally protected rights to be free from unconstitutional searches and seizures. So if you're under arrest, don't resist arrest. So if they say, yes, you are under arrest, do not resist arrest. Even if you believe the arrest is unfair. If you're under arrest, you have the right to ask why. And I think you should ask why. Otherwise, say you wish to remain silent and ask for a lawyer immediately. Once you do that, stop talking. Just stop talking. Don't give any excuses. Don't explain what you are doing. Don't say anything. Don't sign anything. Or don't make any decisions without a lawyer. You have the right to make a local phone call. And if calling your lawyer, the police are not allowed to listen in. So I just want to go through those three critical things again. If you are stopped by a police officer, ask if you are free to leave. Do it in a polite, calm way. If they say yes, walk away politely and calmly. If they say no, say, I do not consent to searches. However, if they search you, you have to allow them to search you. Just say, I do not consent to searches. I do not consent to searches. And if you are under arrest, and they say, yes, you're under arrest, we recommend that you not say anything and you ask for a lawyer. Specifically, ask for a lawyer. I want to speak to a lawyer. I am not going to answer any questions until I get to speak to my lawyer. Those are the three most important things to say when you're interacting with the police.
So Matt says you can say I don't consent to searches, but the police can search your bag anyway. So what do you do once they've violated your rights? One thing to keep in mind, the street's probably not the best place to challenge police misconduct. And again, no physical resistance or threatening to file a complaint. These are safety concern issues, I think, that are important to keep in mind. Rather than escalating things, we think it's important to try to de-escalate. Then as soon as you can. So we often get contacted by folks and they say, my rights have been violated, my rights have been violated. And the first thing we ask is, what kind of information do you have? So things to keep in mind of what type of information you want to start collecting when your rights have been violated. Contact information for witnesses. So anyone you think may know who's involved or saw how your rights were violated, get their contact information. Write everything down as soon as possible so that you remember everything as clearly and in as much detail as possible. These things can include the officer's badge number, officer's name, the patrol card number, which agency the officers were from. Sometimes at protests, different police agencies are all working together. So if you see different agencies, that may be important information. Any other details you think might be important. If you sustain an injury, try to take photographs. But again, safety first, get medical attention before you start worrying about the rest of these things. So if you have the ability, once you get medical information, to take photographs, that could be helpful. And it can also be helpful to take follow-up photographs so you can start to document the progression of your injury. So if you have a big dark bruise, every day you want to take a picture so that you can see how long it lasted. Something like that might be helpful. If you go to a doctor or the emergency room, it can be helpful. You should keep the records from those visits. Any sort of documentation about your treatment there, I would keep. And then once you have all of this information, you can file a complaint with the agency that you feel violated your rights. And there are things like the internal affairs type divisions or civilian complaint boards. And if you can't figure out who that is, please reach out to us and we can help you figure out who the right people to talk to are. Or you can get your own attorney through the Oregon State Bar, or you can contact us.
Yeah, that's right. So a couple of other things that we want to touch on quickly before we turn to the questions. So in many cases, police and security forces have responded in ways that we believe profoundly undermine the fundamental rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, often leading to escalations in violence through unwarranted, inappropriate, and disproportionate use of force. Frankly, you've seen that recently at No Doppel with the militarization of police. You've seen it actually here in Portland with the way that folks show up, kind of looking like RoboCop. Law enforcement, including here in Oregon, increasingly respond to popular protests with crowd control weapons. The ACLU and other leading groups have warned of the detrimental health effects that these weapons can have and the impact of their use on the meaningful enjoyment of the freedom of assembly and the right to protest. We want to go through some of these crowd control weapons so you know what's happening out at a protest, so you can document it appropriately, and frankly, so you can protect yourself. So,
I would just add that for the information that you start to collect when you think your rights have been violated, these are the types of things that might be important to note in your notes, what you've seen being used against the crowd.
Right. Recently, you've probably seen the really disturbing videos of water cannons being used against protesters in freezing conditions out in North Dakota. So that's something, water cannons. Things that are more commonly used here are things like kinetic impact projectiles. Those are projectiles. Those are things like rubber bullets or bean bags, and pretty severe injuries can occur. Imagine being hit with a rubber bullet in your eye. Chemical irritants, things like tear gas or pepper spray to your face. Acoustic weapons that are sometimes called sound cannons or sonic cannons. They can emit like very painful, really loud sounds that can hurt sometimes permanently the delicate organs in your ears, like your eardrums. Some other things that we see somewhat frequently are disorientation devices like flashbang or stun grenades, or which create like a loud explosion and a bright flash that can be very disorienting. If you want to know more about this, and generally, the ACLU and others released a report earlier this year detailing the health and free speech concerns around crowd control weapons called Lethal in Disguise, the Health Consequences of Crowd Control Weapons. It's on the ACLU website, and Sarah's going to post it in the comments for us. So I think that essentially wraps up our main part of the presentation, and we just wanted to answer a few questions that folks might have. So I'm going to just wait for those to be passed to me.
Okay, so here's our first question. Someone asked on there, can police harass you for filming them?
Oh, that's a really good question. No. So you are lawfully allowed to film the police in a public space. You have the right to photograph anything that's in plain view. It includes federal buildings, it includes transportation facilities, and it most certainly includes the police. The police officers cannot confiscate or demand to view your digital photographs or video without a warrant, nor may they delete your photographs or video under any circumstances.
What about, do you have to let them know that you're filming them?
No, you don't. So there's a law that was passed in Oregon, basically says that, you should be filming in plain view, but if you're doing, this, I can guarantee you that police officer knows that you're filming them. And that is, we think, completely within compliance of the law. The only time that I think it ever gets tricky is if you're secretly filming the police, and, just don't do that. Just film the police right out in the open, exercising your First Amendment protected rights.
Someone else asked if police
can I say one more thing about that, Sarah? So there is an instance in which, the police can ask for evidence, right? So like if you are the witness to a crime and you're filming the police can ask you to provide them with a copy of the video that you took, and you would need to comply with that. They should get like a warrant or a subpoena to get that. And if you have questions, like if that happens to you, if you have questions, feel free to contact us. Sorry, go on, Sarah.
Related, someone asked, can police legally interfere with your cell phone? Maybe they are asking about filming, but can you talk about that?
Yeah, so you can answer that, or if you want me to.
Either way, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. So the answer is no. The police cannot interfere with your cell phone legally. They need a warrant to access the information on your cell phone. If you're videotaping, that's even a higher threshold. You're like protected First Amendment speech, in addition to just accessing the data. I think it is, like I said, it's only under that limited circumstance where you have been the witness to a crime and they also get a warrant that they have the right to seize your phone.
I was going to just add.
I was just going to say, though, if a police officer takes your phone away from you, don't fight with them. Don't resist them. Don't try and say, you can tell them you're breaking the law, like hopefully somebody else is videotaping you around you, because they are in fact breaking the law and it's unconstitutional, but do not engage in a physical altercation with the police, frankly, under any circumstances. It's really dangerous for you to do that.
That's right. I was going to add something very similar. We've heard from a number of folks all around the state about being ordered to step really far away from an incident that you're filming. Again, comply with the orders, deal with the rights violations later. safety first.
Right.
Can police target people for exercising their First Amendment rights?
No. So Sarah just asked a really important question. Can police target people for exercising their First Amendment rights? That is something called First Amendment retaliation. So when a police officer identifies somebody who's engaging in First Amendment protected speech and they don't like it, and maybe they arrest them, but maybe they don't even arrest them. Maybe they just like, hey Kelly, you're out here again, like I'm gonna arrest you, or like whatever, like why don't you go away from here? Repeatedly, doing that kind of harassing activity, that is prohibited by the First Amendment. That is First Amendment retaliation, and that is squarely unconstitutional.
Someone asks, when is it appropriate for law enforcement to intervene in First Amendment activity?
So, I mean, I think that's a really good question, right? I think that it is, if there is some kind of really clear, really imminent harm or like law breaking that is happening, that is, perhaps like significant destruction of property, or, someone's getting beat up or trampled or something, like, yeah, the police officers are there to keep people safe. And to the extent that they're engaged in activities that is really targeted at keeping people safe, I think that's fine. But, breaking up a protest because they don't like it or because they think it might get dangerous some point, or calling an entire protest a riot when there are a couple of isolated incidents happening on one part of one street, I just don't think that cuts it.
Yeah, I agree. I think safety is an issue that they're tasked with to deal with, and when they're doing that, they're serving a better purpose. And if they're just sitting there trying to control our First Amendment rights, that's when I think we clearly just cross the line.
Right, and to be clear, policing in an event where there are, maybe thousands of people taking to the streets can be very difficult. And we appreciate the incredibly difficult position that police officers find themselves in. But what we would say is that you should always err on the side of allowing First Amendment activities to occur, police officers, and really limit your activities to engaging with the public when there is a very clear, very imminent public safety threat.
We're getting some of the same kinds of questions, but someone asked if we could talk a little bit about mobile justice, and someone else asked if the video would be available to watch later. So maybe you could just say that you've talked about it already.
We have talked about mobile justice. I will just say we get all the videos. It's available for us to watch later. If you don't attach your name to it, it's hard for us to return it to anyone under confidentiality principles. But if you submit something and your name is attached to it, we may be able to talk to you about it.
Yeah, this is what the app looks like. Oregon, Mobile Justice Oregon. It's available on the App Store, both Apple and Android. And those videos automatically get uploaded to the ACLU of Oregon, which we review. And I think does that answer the question? Okay, great.
And this video too will be.
Yeah.
Oh, this video.
Will be saved.
Yes.
Just say that.
Yeah, no, so this video that you're watching right now will be available to review later on our Facebook page. So, I think that's about it for us today. For those of you who have tuned in, thank you so much for participating in our Know Your Rights Protesters edition. If you go out to protest tonight, please be safe. Remember, if you engage with police officers, that you say those three things that we talked about, which ask if you're if you're under arrest. If you're not, walk away calmly. Stay calm in that interaction. Ask if you're say that you are not consenting to a search, and if you're arrested, say nothing. Ask for a lawyer and then say nothing. We at the ACLU think that protest is just so incredibly important to democracy, and we are just really encouraged, I think, by the amount of people who are actively engaged in today's sort of political climate So if you have more questions, feel free to contact us at www.aclu-or.org. If you have a complaint, go to that same website /help.
Yep, and phone number 503-227-3186.
Again, my name is Matt Dos Santos. I'm the legal director of the ACLU of Oregon.
Kelly Simon, staff attorney. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
And there's a couple more questions. We'll go through the comments and answer them that way.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks.